Welcome back to the Gateway RV Transport Podcast. Jordan and I are going to be talking, this is Justin, we're going to be talking today about hours of service and why truck drivers, in particular RV transporters, have to maintain a record of their hours of driving. So, to start, we'll explain a little bit about what that is. So there's the basic rules for truck drivers.
From my understanding, I think it was in 1936, the Department of Transportation realized that truck drivers were driving all day, all night, and crashing and killing people. And they thought, well, we probably better change that. They probably should only have certain hours of service, or in other words, hours that they're able to log or to drive legally. So it's changed a lot since then and changes regularly. So just like from my experience, any government regulating body, the rules change constantly. And the same thing here. But the general idea behind it, and originally as well as now, is that drivers aren't driving tired. There's a lot of opinions about the particular rules and whether they are effective or not, or if even in some cases in the past have been counterproductive. But the idea is, don't drive tired. So even as we get started in this, if you're a driver, one of our drivers, or honestly, probably the more experience you have as a human, the more you realize it's not worth it, that being driving tired. I don't know if you did this, but like as a teenager, when I would travel for work when I was younger, you had to get there. So you would do whatever it takes. And sometimes there were some very close calls that now I'm like, it's not worth it. Just pull over and take a nap. If you're going to be late, that's fine. Anyway, to our drivers, I would say the same thing. Don't drive when you're tired, even if it means time maximization. You're probably going to get into this later. But if you're tired, just stop. Take a nap.
And so truck drivers will have, it used to be these paper sheets that there's a grid and you track your hours and there's certain windows of what you can do. Now most things are done on an app, and most trucks, it bypasses the human element significantly by having a device called an electronic logging device, an ELD, that plugs into a truck and records drive time based on the computer interacting with the truck. So our industry is exempt from the ELD mandate in most cases, and so our drivers will record digitally through an app their drive time.
When you say in most cases, do you know offhand the wording or at least the idea of what the exemption entails?
Yeah, so for our drivers that pull multiple RVs at the same time, so haul and tow is what we call that, or multiples division. So you'll see guys pulling a flatbed with several RVs, smaller RVs on there, or a haul and tow truck where there's a truck with an extended bed where you put an RV on the bed and pull one behind. Those drivers will not have the exemption apply that tells them they don't have to use an electronic logging device. There are a few other criteria.
But to qualify for the exemption, it's a newly manufactured recreational vehicle. Has to be what's in tow. So like other industries that are exempt from this, I think ours is pretty specifically mentioned.
Yeah,
and
there are other things.
Newly manufactured recreational vehicles, right, with tires on the road.
Yeah, so which precludes RVs that are sitting on another trailer, so because they're pulling the trailer and the RVs are not towed on by themselves, they're on other equipment.
Right. And why they made that, the only speculation I have is the RV industry has a pretty good association, and I think they petitioned pretty hard to be exempt from the ELD mandate.
And due to the nature of the contractors that we're dealing with, it makes sense why. And I think to give the full context, you'd have to have a pretty good industry understanding. And so, like you said, the RV Industry Association does a pretty good job of lobbying for what is in the best interest of the general public and the RV industry. Well, I have it's kind of the history of how these rules came about. I wanted to just give a quick timeline recap. You were very close on the 1936. It was 1937, according to this. Hours of service rules first issued in 1937 when the Interstate Commerce Commission issued its first driver regulations, which allowed 10 hours of driving time, 8 hours off duty. So, as Jordan mentioned, the specifics have changed. In 1963, a change in rules allowed drivers to split their 8 hours off duty into 2 periods of 4 hours each. So I won't go through every little iteration of the changes, but things have changed over the years. 2003 issued a final rule that it was significant. Extended drive time to 11 hours, but cut the driving window to 14. Let's see some of the other ones that are interesting in here. There's a bunch of changes every few years. The electronic logging device mandate was published in 2015. So that is what we were just talking about. The late 2017, the ELD rule goes into effect. Mm-hmm. So there, as is the case with a lot of regulations, they'll announce the regulation, and then there's open for comment from the public, and then they have review boards, and then it actually takes effect and is enforced years later.
Whether they care about the public's comment or not, but it's nice that we feel like we have.
Well, and I started watching Parks and Rec yesterday again, and which is just, you go to the town hall meetings of Parks and Rec, and that's a pretty good representation, maybe, of them taking public's opinion. So I won't go through all the different rules. The main rules now are you can drive 11 hours in a 14-hour window. You have to take a half-hour break within an 8-hour period. And, what am I missing? What's the other big one?
And then there's a 70-hour rule.
The 70-hour rule.
So in an 8-day period, you can only be on duty for 70 hours total before you have to reset. So every time frame has a reset associated with it. So a 70-hour, like a week, in order to reset that clock, you have to be off duty for a day and a half.
Yeah.
34 hours. Full 34 hours to the minute. And the same thing with your daily hour limit, which is your on-duty daily hour limit's 14 hours, which is driving plus any other work-related activity. Filling up, maintenance on your truck technically is considered.
Yeah.
And then as well as anything else, hooking up to a trailer, doing your pre-trip inspection, filling out paperwork, communicating with customers, that's considered on-duty, not driving activities, which doesn't count against the 11 hours, which is just the drive time restriction. To reset both of those, that 14 or the 11 hours, you have to have a full 10-hour break. So 14 hours plus 10 hours.
There's your 24-hour
24 hours.
Yeah. So there's 4 duty statuses that a driver could be in at any given time: off duty, on duty not driving, on duty driving, and sleeper berth time. Our industry, most drivers don't have a DOT qualified sleeper berth. That's every once in a while we'll get a driver who will log that, which is like, you don't log that unless you have the proper dimensions and requirements for a recognized sleeper berth. Some of our guys do.
And there's not really an advantage to that unless you have a co-driver.
Yeah. Then you can do the split sleeper stuff. And I don't get too into the weeds on that because I don't even know if we have anybody that applies to currently. And very rarely, if ever, in the past have we had that. So that's more for traditional trucking. Mm-hmm. And even in traditional trucking, team driving, certain situations, that kind of stuff.
How good of an how advantageous is it for a team driver in what we do?
Team driving and what we do? A little bit, because so you think about that 14-hour window, you could maybe get a couple of extra hours by team driving, but sitting in the passenger seat does not count as off duty. So if a truck's rolling down the road, the guy driving is logging his driving. The person sitting in the passenger seat, the co-driver, is on duty but not driving. So they don't get to log that as off-duty time. So it's not like you can just run continuously. Versus if you have a sleeper berth, one guy's running down the road, the other one's in the sleeper. There's some things you could maybe do there. But for us, it's maybe you could squeeze a couple extra hours in, but
the reason I ask, that's a fairly common question that we get when drivers lease on. Their expectation is, if my wife and I both lease on, we can drive nonstop. I said, well, that's not actually the case.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't work.
It does give you a little bit extra time, and it is nice to also have a co-driver if you wanted to swap back and forth over the course of that 14-hour window, but you're not doubling your time.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about, so that the general premise is safety, and yeah, that's really the idea behind it. So the reason that we enforce that is because we want to be safe. We also need to be compliant to continue to operate. We have a DOT authority that gives us, the government recognizing that we're allowed to do what we do, and we put that in jeopardy if we're not in compliance with their regulations. So we have to do it. We have to enforce it. We have to have, corrective action when we fail to follow the rules. Yeah, that's basically it.
Well, here's one of the biggest logging questions in our industries. Are you required to log your return trip? So that is a controversial question. A lot of anybody that's in this industry has their opinion about what it should be and why. But it is the DOT's opinion, who's really the only person, the only body that matters, that if you are commercial, you log. And if you are returning from commercial enterprise, you're commercial, vis-a-vis you log. So keep that in mind. There's all kinds of arguments as to why you could be. What if I'm taking a trailer to New Mexico and I have a brother that lives in Arizona? I'm just there visiting him. I'm not there. Once I've dropped off the trailer, I'm just there, killing time with my brother. What's the DOT's opinion about that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where it gets a little bit interesting. So in this scenario, say you go drop in Phoenix, then you're going, what was your scenario?
New Mexico and somewhere else in the Southwest.
You would not have to log that personal driving as you're out visiting, but once you start coming back in this direction, that's when you would. This is one of the hard parts about some of the splitting hairs on some of these things is it's going to depend on what's the safest way to protect yourself in an audit situation or in a inspection situation. So if you get pulled over by the DOT, they can look at your last 7 days of logs. Motive, or formerly known as Keep Truckin', is the app that we use. It keeps logs for the last 14 days on your phone. After that, it's stored. We have access to it, but you don't through your phone. And so we have to, if we were to get audited, they can go back 6 months of logs. And so if an auditor were to come in and look at a trip, you're basically, what would be the safest way to ensure that you're not going to get flagged for failure to log when you're supposed to log in an audit or an inspection? And so in every situation is going to have different levels of nuance. In this situation where you go out and then you're doing personal things with your family or whatever out in New Mexico, the way that I would do it is you log to where you deliver, you do what you're going to do. When you start heading back this direction is when you have to log. Mm-hmm. As a personal example, I dropped a trailer several years ago. It's probably 5 years ago now in Billings. I went from Billings to Bozeman, picked up my family from the airport. We went to Yellowstone, went to Glacier, and did a family trip. I then dropped them back off at the airport in Bozeman, drove back to Billings, logged back from Billings. So I dropped the trailer in Billings, stopped logging, did all my stuff. When I got back to Billings and was heading home, I started logging it again. Mm-hmm. And so the just different levels of, protecting yourself. If you're pulling a trailer, you have to keep everything, it's quite clear cut, and you want to keep everything current and accurate and up to speed. When you're not pulling a trailer, it depends a little bit. And so you could kind of draw a flow chart. Are you heading back? Are you heading to pick up another trailer? Is it completely personal driving? There's a lot of different nuance. What I'd recommend is, if you have a situation that you're unclear about, is come talk to Greg or Jordan or I, and we can give you kind of our take. And then there's a small range within our take, depending on the situation, of this is the least risk-averse way to do it, this is the most risk-averse way to do it. And
the answer that you gave is the same answer I always give, is the officer, it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what I think, it matters who the officer who's going to be writing you the ticket thinks about the exact situation that you're in. And so the way that regulations are written is that there's not specifics on every scenario. So they have some latitude to make a judgment call on. And so assume that whoever is going to inspect you, and assume that you are going to get inspected, assume that they are going to be as strict as possible, and then you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
If you, you'll be assume the worst. I don't know. That's maybe a bad way of putting it, but you want to make sure that you're safe.
Yeah.
I don't know. The DOT officers that I've spoken with, they seem like rational people too. It's not like they are looking for reasons to just nail you to the wall as a driver. Now, we do have instances where a driver, for some reason, rubbed an officer the wrong way, and they were got their more than fair share of inspection attention. And so don't do that. Obviously, don't be confrontational when it comes to an inspection. If you feel like you're logging a particular way and an officer feels like that's the incorrect way, maybe have an attitude of learning, of humility. And hey, you take your job seriously and you want to know what you do right, but they also take their job seriously and they feel like they're right. Worst case scenario, they write you a a ticket for something that shouldn't be, we can push back on our end. We can get those overturned. But first of all, know the rules. That way you know if you're in the right or in the wrong. And then in any place where there's some ambiguity, err on the side of caution so that you're safe.
Yeah. And just a little bit about that review process. So it's called data queue, is where we can put in a request for a review. And so it will escalate based on, so if it's a pretty straightforward mistaken thing. So for example, we had a driver inspected in South Dakota and they put that he needed a CDL. He didn't. It was pretty clear cut. Just a rookie mistake on the cop's point, quickly overturned. Then I have gone back and forth with the state of Maine about the way that I viewed it and the way that they viewed it, and I viewed them being in the wrong. We went back and forth, escalated, and I ended up losing. And so it ultimately didn't matter that I thought logic and reason were on my side. Ultimately, it's going to decide on the people who get the.
What was that? What was that discussion?
That was in relation to the logging back. This was years ago. After this is when we started enforcing logging back more directly. The way that we were doing it, I argued my point on why the way that we were doing it I thought to be not only better but just as safe, if not safer. And anyway, ended up losing it. So it doesn't really matter what I think. Mm-hmm. I agree with most of the hours of service rules that we have in place. I actually think some of them should be modified because they don't make sense in my opinion. I think there are some rules that are not actually promoting safety. In some cases, it's even the opposite of that. I won't get into all of those now. Most of them I actually agree with that they make sense. It's pretty intuitive. Like you don't want truck drivers just trucking on through the night and being exhausted. I get it. I'm very good supporter of all of that. But ultimately it doesn't matter what my opinions are. It matters what the regulations and rules are. We're going to follow them. Even if I don't agree with them 100%, I agree, like I said, again, with them like most of the way. But like anything with the government, I have my take on what I think they could do better or could do differently or don't do efficiently. And it doesn't stop with the trucking industry. So, yeah, if you probably thought that I was somebody who just saluted everything that the government has ever done and then never was a critic of it, but I'm not. Especially with this industry where I feel like I know my stuff a little bit. We've been doing this for long enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so if you're a driver and you have these "why can't we do this" type of questions, most of the time the answer is because that's the rules. If you're asking us what's our opinion about what the rules are, we can go into all kinds of detail about why we think they are what they are, or what they should be doing different or whatever. At the end of the day, we don't come up with the rules. So every once in a while we have a driver come up being frustrated about us enforcing the rules, and they're not our rules.
Yeah.
So it's the rules of the government. If you can figure out a way to get them to change it, awesome. But until then, we play by the rules.
And just as a second note on that, some of the things that we're involved in, obviously we're a smaller company, so we are not involved at the highest levels of lobbying. We don't have the resources to do that, but we have been involved with and gone to different industry association meetings. There's, for example, Indiana Motor Truck Association. Greg and I have gone to a couple of those events. You and Greg and I went to one event in Elkhart. We've gone to some of our insurance stuff. They have some advocacy stuff and working with Washington type stuff. We're aware of some of those things. We've gotten hands-on a little bit with some of those things. A lot of the other companies in our industry have gotten involved. So there are people out there, say what you will about lobbyists, the good and the bad about it all. There are people in our industry lobbying. I remember what was one of the insurance conference things they're saying, any issue you can think of, there is somebody out there lobbying for it or against it in Washington. And that includes the RV transport industry. So there you go. This is probably the most interesting subject we could have dived into. But if it means anything to you, if you find this to not be an interesting thing, this is when I first started, logs was the main thing I did. We used to use a program called Rapid Logs, and we used paper. 8 hours a day, picture this, I suppose. In a little above a bar in Syracuse, we had our little office. Me scanning paper logs for 8 hours.
And it wasn't a fast scanner.
And then you have to line up the grid, and so using Rapid Logs, like, oh, I'm so glad we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, even to you traditional truckers who like paper logs, and there is some satisfaction of getting a ruler and having your grid,
it's like art,
look just perfectly. I mean, that feels good. But the electronic version is so much easier in every way.
Most people will not go back once they've tried the phones. There's very few people who I would say, you should probably stick to paper. But most of those people, first of all, don't listen to podcasts because if you can find a podcast on your phone, you can figure out how to log. It's the guys who maybe don't know how to open their phones, and
but we have some guys that are
you're right.
They're technologically keen.
But
that
they just paper is the way that
I think it just is what.
But most people, they try their phone. It is so much easier. It's I don't know. I'm one of those people. So I'm not trying to diss all you paper people, but
I think some of the hesitancy is you can, and everybody knows this, so it's not a secret. You can edit your paper logs. You can throw one away and recreate a new one if you are manipulating logs. Now, we absolutely don't advocate that you manipulate your logs. Excuse me. The Motive app still gives the user some ability to adjust. Not cheat on your logs, but the
if you
ability
forget
to
to
adjust.
update it, which I have done. I get home, I forgot to log off duty. I go to take my next trip, and it shows that I've been on duty for the last 72 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I'm now stuck. You can
go through it, and you can retroactively edit it, and it is easier than drawing a whole new log sheet and turning that in instead.
Yeah.
Again, we don't advocate cheating on your logs, but
and we crack down. We've had to, of necessity, be pretty strict about cracking down on logs. So because that is the biggest area that, and not going too much into the weeds. I know we're trying to wrap this up, but there are different scoring systems that the government uses, that the Department of Transportation, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration uses when they're deciding who to inspect and who to let go. So when a truck's rolling through past the scale, they're running our DOT number, and it pops up some different score categories. Hours of service, and the scoring system is kind of based on peer grouping. So they're comparing you to other trucking companies. Most trucking companies have electronic logging devices, computers that are doing this all for them. We are still grouped with those people, and those people it's pretty hard to not just do it exactly as you're supposed to, because you have to plug in this thing and it's logging it for you. We have the human element involved. And so we are just statistically, we're going to have more problems because we're still doing with the human element. There's a lot of reasons why, and I think it's good that we don't be put in the bucket of having to use an ELD, but it means that our scores are harder to keep down because we're competing with people that are playing by different rules in a good way in that sense. And so we have to, of necessity, every time that we have a failed inspection due to logging problems, we have to be pretty strict about that stuff. Other areas, it's actually easier for us. So, for example, vehicle maintenance stuff. We're competing with semis and heavier duty equipment and things where they're having more problems generally. Our guys aren't having as many problems. They have less to maintain in some cases. I don't know if you would really even say less to maintain, but just different to maintain. And so in some ways, it's a leg up for us. So it's different, but hours of service is the area that is harder for us to enforce. Of the different categories, just to give another example, the drug and alcohol scoring system, it only takes a couple of problems, and then you're right up at the top of the list on being problematic. So obviously we're very strict about that too, but it's a lot less common. Most of our drivers are not going to be encountering problems with that. And if they did, that is a lot more intense, because it's if somebody's not filling out their paperwork correctly versus somebody's using drugs or alcohol and driving a commercial vehicle, that's a whole different league. It's a whole different area. So drug and alcohol things are going to put you right up to the top. So anyway.
And relating to that score, I don't think, even drivers that have been doing this for a long time, I don't think they realize how much it affects everyone else when they have a bad inspection. So we've tried really hard, and when I say we, our compliance department and our drivers have tried really hard since I've been here to improve our score. Because, like you mentioned, the nature of our particular niche is that it's difficult for us to have a good score. And I think we've done a good job comparatively to our peers. I think we've done a really good job. It takes one or two really bad inspections to negate 2 years worth of strict compliance. And so if you're a driver and getting inspected, it's not that big of a deal. I'm the one that has to pay the fine, which in a lot of cases they don't even have to pay a physical fine. They got a piece of paper that said, you didn't do this right, you didn't do that right, you didn't do this right. I think some drivers see it. They just got a slap on the wrist from a DOT officer, and that's that. It is not that. Yeah. It is. It's that score that they use is what determines whether we're going to be inspected at a higher frequency. But it also affects things such as like our insurance renewals. Mm-hmm. If we're a company that shows a history of uncompliance, it's harder to get insurance, or it's a lot more expensive. And of course, anything that's expensive, it affects all of us. So you want better rates. I mean, it's not directly related, but it's absolutely related that
It's
the rates
one of
that
the
we're
many
able
things I
to
can say,
pay is based on how many expenses that we have. And if our huge expenses insurance, and that's only going up, and if the reason it's going up is because of compliance, now it's starting to affect everybody more directly. And it's also not easy to correct. It takes 2 years for a bad inspection to come off of our history. So one day of negligence on your logging or error, like what's the word trying to think of? Cheating on your logs is going to have a long-term effect on everybody else. It's not a victimless concern.
And the areas that are the most problematic for us are keeping it current and keeping it accurate. Little things, we don't get these very often, but you forgot to put your mileage on a log. The severity of the violation, the way that they weight the different violation categories, that's not going to be as big of a deal. A false log or no log, that's a big deal. And so they quickly rack up the scores. False logs, not logging back, that falls under the bucket of a false log, which is one of false logs and no logs are the worst that we can have, practically speaking. So it does. The main thing is just keep it current, keep it accurate. If you can do that, you're probably going to be fine. Because the nice thing about the digital logs too, if you are running out of time, it flags you. If you did go over time, it flags you. A big red thing saying there's something wrong. You need to fix this. So as long as you're paying attention, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. So try to do your best. Stay compliant. A few weeks ago, I don't know if we have any lawyers that listen to this, but if there's a DOT cop who is specifically targeting RV transporters or a particular company just from his own free will, if there's any way to help mitigate that issue, I don't think that there would be, but
yeah. Well, we'll talk to some DOT cops. We'll get somebody on here, but yeah, if you're in the Northeast Indiana area, you especially better make sure your stuff is together because they target our industry because this is where we're based out of, and we have been the victims or whatever you want to call it of that kind of targeting, and maybe even a little bit kind of biased targeting where they're being harder on us. I mean, every driver's got a different story, but when we have been pulled over in this area and they say, well, there was a dude flying past me 100 miles an hour, but they pulled me over because I'm pulling a trailer. Whatever the reason is, you got to know in this area, you're more likely to be spotted. Just like when we're driving around, you see RV transporters everywhere around here. Every time I'm driving home, you see different companies driving by. Anyway.
So anyway, do your best to stay compliant. Hopefully, if you stuck with us this long, you probably are already compliant. But
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Well, and then whatever topic we have for our next episode, we'll make sure it's extra interesting to counter this more boring topic, I guess.
Yeah. Well, some of the fun, I don't know fun stories, but some of the heart racing stories is if you're not current on your logs and you get pulled into a weigh station, doing that one time changes how you operate.
Yeah.
That one time for me was in Canada, so it wasn't even in the country, and got pulled into a weigh station that I presumed was not even open. First thing in the morning, I wasn't caught up on my logs. And then
they think this guy's on something.
Yeah, looking in the camera.
You
probably shouldn't tell bad stories.
You start answering questions that they're not even asking, and you start
and I put on a fake Canadian
committing
accent.
the crimes.
That was the problem.
I know, especially when you go to Eastern Canada, like going to Newfoundland. They're so cool and they're so friendly. It's a contagious accent. Because they would be like, "Welcome to Newfoundland, eh?" Like, oh, it's so hard not to mirror that because you just like.
Well, I think there's like an innate reason that we do that.
Part of the Newfoundland, Nova Scotia culture.
Yeah. Well, and I found Natasha obviously has an accent. When she meets new people, it's really funny. Sometimes people accidentally go into a fake English accent and then they think that they're being incredibly offensive, even though they didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah,
but it's
I feel
kind of funny to see that
when I practice my Spanish, which I'm trying to practice Spanish 10 minutes a day or whatever. But when it's hard not to speak in Spanish in an accent, just because I'm used to hearing it in a particular accent, right? And so I try. It's like, oh, please don't. Whenever I do have the very rare opportunities to try and practice my Spanish with a Spanish speaker, let's keep my same dumb accent that I currently have. Don't adopt
But what about
a different one.
Okay, if anybody knows the answer to this, what about accents in languages that are tone driven?
Maybe I don't know.
How does that work?
Like kind of Asian.
Yeah, like
languages?
Chinese, like
part
yeah,
of
inflection is part of the language. So
yeah.
is there? I'm sure there is a variety in accent. I just can't really wrap my head around what that would be like.
Yeah.
Because I bet, like extreme rural China, their accent is probably very different than like, I'd say Hong Kong. Is that so?
Yeah.
Traditional versus like simplified Mandarin. I don't know. I don't know nothing about the Chinese language. But anyway, accents interesting. That's more interesting than logs. That's for sure.
Well, that'll be our next topic. Well, thank you again for listening. If you don't have anything else,
Nope.
we'll wrap it up, and safe driving out there.